Welcome back to Financial Therapy. It's not just about the money. I'm personal financial planner, columnist, and financial therapist Rick Kahler. Research tells us that 90% of all financial decisions are made emotionally, not logically. For nearly 4 decades, I've been helping people make better money decisions. So what makes my financial worldview different from most financial experts? I blend the nuts and bolts of financial advice with the emotions that drive making them. Good money decisions are not just about the money. So let's get started with today's episode. Welcome back to another episode. And again, a big thank you to all of you that do follow and listen to the podcast, for all of your really kind remarks. As I travel about, I am really glad that this is of benefit to you. So today I want to talk about giving advice. And I'm laughing because I've had such a huge transition in my life from being the ultimate advice dispenser to being someone who really kind of flinches when I'm asked for advice. And I'm certainly, as a financial planner, and to certainly some degree as a financial therapist, advice is typically what brings people to us. A lot of professionals make their living giving advice. Lawyers, doctors, therapists, accountants, and then of course financial planners and financial therapists, and therapists in general. So it's a big field, right? Knowledge is a big field. Wisdom is applying knowledge, and really takes a lot more competency than dispensing knowledge. And as I said early in my career, I was more than willing, even eager, to dispense my advice. And that was solicited or not. I was great at finishing people's sentences. But I was just, if I knew it, I was ready to give it. Now, to some of you, that's going to strike you, excuse me, a little bit odd. Because not every personality is into advice giving as such. Certainly not as much as my personality, which in Enneagram speak is a type 1 personality characteristic, which is a type of personality that really believes they're right, and more often or not is because of the research they put into it. They are often called the reformer. They're very idealistic. So they are out to help you get it right. Another personality type that gives out advice would be the type 2, the helper. And their advice is coming from the motivation of really wanting to help. And probably a type 1's advice is more coming from the idealism that if everybody did it right, the world would be a better place. Of course, right is very subjective. So I think someone who searches for advice, who's looking for advice, is the stages of change, maybe contemplating making a change rather than continuing in the status quo. They're not necessarily ready to change or in the action phase of making a change, but they're in that contemplation stage. And it could be about a lot of things. In financial planning, it could be about drawing a will, making an estate plan, filling out a tax return, a number of things. And of course, we can be in contemplation in many, many, many areas in our life. So the important thing to note that took me a while to understand is because someone asks advice, that does not mean they are ready to take action and follow the advice. And I had that reaction many, many times. Somebody would ask me, the few times I would actually be asked for advice, and I would give it, and then they wouldn't follow it. And I was just, full of judgment, like, what is wrong? I just gave you the advice. So I assumed that anybody asking for advice was ready to follow it, which in the stages of change, again, would be in that action phase. Most people are not. I joke, and I actually think there's some truth to this, that sometimes when we ask advice of somebody, we're testing to see if they have the right answer. And if they don't have the right answer, we move on to the next one, which is really, I don't think we're asking for advice. We are asking for confirmation of the direction that we think we should go or that we want to go, but we'd like some support. So that's actually confirmation bias, is wanting to hear the direction that we want to go. We want that confirmation of the direction that we really want to go. We're not in a position of being open and listening or considering something opposite of what we really want. So today, through lots of therapy, I really try to avoid dispensing financial advice, and especially if it's unsolicited. I remember when I came into this, I'd been doing a lot of co-facilitation of financial therapy groups at Onsite, and worked a lot with Ted Klons. And he was the one that really impressed this on me. In fact, he was working with a client and in a group once, and the client was at a place where normally in group therapy they'd press on through their feelings or maybe their inaction or their fear. And I remember Ted asked them, are you finished, or do you feel complete? And the client said yes. And so he stopped everything right there. And I was kind of dumbfounded by that. Like, why? There was so much more he needed to do. He said, because he said he was done. And I was, of course, sure of the path that work needed to be led in or directed. It felt very unfinished to me. And of course, my advice would have been for him to continue to really go down this path. So that was kind of amazing to me, and as a result of following the client, because that's what that was, following the client, I really switched my financial planning practice to not having an agenda, following the client, and not giving advice until I was asked. This created a little bit of chaos in my financial planning firm because most firms have a process. And I kind of swung too far the other way, right? From being very rigid in my process, chop, 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 to just being, well, where's your energy today? Maybe we haven't gotten all the data. We haven't done an intake. We don't have tax returns. Obvious, well, I don't know that it's obvious, but I came to a balance between that because a financial planner is a fiduciary for the client in the financial realm. So there are things, there is an agenda that a financial planner will have, like making sure tax returns are filed, exploring the need for wills and powers of attorney and things like that. Still, that said, I really try to avoid dispensing advice unless I'm asked, and in financial therapy, even more so. And that's not all financial therapists would agree with that. Not all therapists would agree with not dispensing advice. But again, it's really a balance. In IFS, advice is not welcomed in the IFS process. It is helping the client uncover the reasons for their actions and the woundedness. And from that process, typically, a client will get clear as to what the path is that they should follow. The best advice comes from within the client or from within us. When it comes from without, it's a pretty tricky road. So one of the problems when I give advice is that too often I think I know the answer based on an incomplete set of facts that I don't recognize as incomplete. That's really important. I think I got all the facts. And I can't tell you how many times that I have given advice and thought I had the facts and I didn't. So advice sometimes can be given very prematurely. Sometimes the best thing I can do when asked for advice is to say, well, I need to understand some things a little more before I give you some options. And I do like, when giving advice, to give options rather than specific courses of action. And this is a principle that comes also from Love and Logic. It's a way to interact with kids, where you give your kids options. And one of the touchstones of that system is anytime that I, as a parent, am feeling anger, that I probably need to back up. And that if I can come up with options of which I don't care which one it is that they adapt, that is a win. So got off a little bit on child rearing, but quite frankly, these principles apply to adults, right? Human beings are wired to resist being told what to do, right? And this is very true of unsolicited advice. We already covered the fact that many times when someone asks us for advice, they're looking to see if we got the right answer. Imagine what it is when you give unsolicited advice. That can turn out really badly. And I'm thinking of a survey, and I probably mentioned this before. I can't give you the site. And it's like 43% of advice that's given when it's in a manner, well, here's what you need to do. I need you to do this. Only 43% is followed. But when advice is given but you're free to do whatever you want, or given, especially if solicited, but if you can say, instead of telling somebody to do something, ask them if they'd be willing to do this or that. The chance goes up to like 80% that they'll do that. So the point is, human beings, we do not like being told what to do. And so it's pretty important that we clothe advice into options, not in a manipulative manner, but in an honest manner that, well, here's something I've done. Here's something others have done in this situation. Here are some options. They'll be received much better. I've also concluded that when I know all the facts, my advice has a 50% chance of being wrong for that person. Now, sometimes, if somebody's saying, I'd like your advice as to which debt I should pay down first. The small debt with the lower interest rate, or the big debt with the higher interest rate. Well, dollars and cents, financially speaking, a person is always financially ahead, paying down the debt with the highest interest rate, regardless of its size. The brain, left to its own volition, is going to pay down the smallest debt first. And in fact, there's some financial advisors that recommend you pay down the smallest debt first so you can get momentum, so that you can get a feeling of accomplishment by paying down that small debt first. Maybe that's true. I don't know. Like I said, that's what the brain does in the limbic system. But even when I know that the money should be applied to that highest debt, it may not be the right answer for that person. And you could get off into a number of very technical things. Sometimes the best thing is not to pay down any of the debt, make the minimum payments, and put that money into a retirement account, especially if the interest rates, the highest interest rate on the debt, say, is 3% or 4%. I know interest rates are higher than that today, but like an old student loan. So again, just to recap all of that, I think that the best financial advice is guiding someone to find their own answers based on accurate information. The best financial advice is guiding someone to find their own answers based on accurate information. We talked about motivational interviewing in the podcast before this, and this comes in a big way. So something I can do is to give a person information, especially from my profession or my knowledge in finance, or how the brain works, or to some degree maybe therapeutically, or just based on my experience. So giving information is different from giving advice. And oftentimes in doing IFS informed financial therapy, I will ask, if we're dealing with a part of a person, I'll ask if I could have, if that part of you would like some information. And oftentimes the part does, and oftentimes when that part of us gets some new information, it can really shift things. And again, it is not advice. It's not, information is not advice clothed as information. It is information that perhaps a person is following that isn't accurate. Now that's, of course, possible. Just think about the tax code, or think about estate planning, or filling out taxes, or all sorts of stories that we make up about the stock markets, that if I invest in stocks, it could go to zero. Well, some information would be if you invest in the whole market. I don't know. There's probably some country where the value of companies have all fallen collectively to nothing. But I can't think of one, and the chances of that happening are incredibly small. So to give information that a company, if you own one stock of a company, yes, it could go to zero. It could go bankrupt. But if you own 12,000 companies, it is almost impossible for all of them to go to nothing. So that's the type of advice, at least when it comes to financial, and that's not advice, sorry. That's the type of information that we can give. So to reiterate what I said before, the most permanent change comes when a person follows advice that comes from within. And this is going back to the motivational interviewing that we talked about. That if when we hit resistance, we are moving too fast. And we've got to slow up and, quote, hang out with a person and learn to be with them. Learn to be curious about what they're saying and to do reflective listening, because as a person has a chance to talk without interruptions, now it is okay when somebody, especially when somebody's going on and you're trying to keep yourself in the conversation. You know how you can zone out when someone is venting and just going on, and that is a disservice to both you and them. So sometimes we need to interrupt only to say, just pause a minute, hold your thought. I just want to make sure that I've heard you correctly. What I'm hearing is this, and that. Is that right? And the person can say, yeah, you got it. Or no, that's not what I meant. And then you can clarify that, and you can do it again. Because it's so important that a person is heard. And I don't know. I've been very curious about listening to people vent. And sometimes I wonder if it's because they don't feel heard. And sometimes I have a problem when somebody's really venting. Because coming into self-development through the recovery channels, through like the adult children of alcoholics and AA and Al-Anon, I came from finishing people's sentences to letting them talk without interruption. And sometimes I just have this inner block of interrupting someone because it was so much part of my past. But I don't know with venting that it's helpful. And maybe some of you know a lot more about that than I do. But I think what can be helpful is just to try and interrupt, get in and just say, let me make sure I understand what you're saying. This, and this. And I think that's a point where interrupting is good. But the whole point is, if a person talks and they're talking about something that they'd like to change, then it's appropriate for you as the listener to become a facilitator of that change, not a director of the change, and to help facilitate, to help guide that person into discovering their answers. And I think I said this in the last session, that so many times I would help somebody do this, and they would just be amazed or see me later, amazed at the great advice I gave them, and I didn't give them any advice whatsoever. So so in saying all this, it doesn't mean that a person won't change courses if they're given advice. But the probability is any change that comes from a directive, any change that comes from giving advice, telling somebody this is what they knew, has a high probability of being resulting in a temporary behavioral change rather than a permanent behavioral change. It could be a behavioral change to please you. It could be a behavioral change that, well, you're the expert, so I should try and do this. But it is not a deep, heartfelt reason to change that is coming from within. It's coming from without. So that's pretty much what I wanted to share with you this time. I wanted to get into the 12 roadblocks that actually can prevent someone from changing. So I think what I will do is we'll do that next week and get into those 12 roadblocks. So thanks for joining me. Again, I appreciate your many comments and following the podcast, and most importantly, that so much of this is resonating and making a difference in lives. So I certainly don't need you to follow the podcast because of our advertisers. So, okay. Take care, and we'll talk next week. Thanks for joining me, Rick Kahler, for another episode of Financial Therapy. It's not just about the money. This is where I combine the nuts and bolts of financial advice with the emotions that drive making them. Remember, every financial behavior, whether it appears illogical to you or others, makes perfect sense when we understand the underlying beliefs, feelings, and thoughts. Sign up for my weekly blog at financialawakenings.com. I hope you'll join me again for our next episode.